On the brink of death and without heirs, a lonely millionaire meets a girl selling gum on the streets. Driven by an inexplicable impulse, he invites the child to live as his daughter for a week. What begins as an unlikely gesture becomes the connection that restores meaning to both their lives. The skyscrapers of Park Avenue cast long shadows in the late New York afternoon. Arthur Montgomery, 58, watched the sunset through the windows of his top-floor office. His business empire, Montgomery Construction and Investments, continued to grow even when he no longer saw any purpose in it. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Montgomery, Dr. Evans is on the line." Arthur sighed deeply. The results of his latest tests were in. Put him through. As he listened to the doctor's words, Arthur remained impassive. 6 months, maybe a year with the most advanced treatments. The disease had spread rapidly. "Thank you, doctor. Yes, I'll come to your office tomorrow to discuss the options." He hung up the phone and returned to contemplating the urban landscape. The buildings, the lights beginning to twinkle across the city, the incessant movement. Everything would continue exactly the same when he was no longer there. On the coffee table, a framed photograph captured the only moment of true happiness in his life. Him, his wife Helen, and little Luke on a beach on Long Island. It had been 5 years since he lost them in an accident on the Long Island Expressway. Since then, Arthur existed only as a shadow of the man he had once been. His routines were limited to waking up, working, returning to his mansion on the Upper East Side, and sleeping. Occasionally, he signed checks for charities, following a cold, calculated donation plan his accountant had devised. "Mr. Montgomery, do you need anything else?" The voice of his secretary over the intercom brought him back to reality. "No, Regina. You can go home." Upon leaving the building, he dismissed his driver. "I'm going to walk a bit today, Julian. You can go." The driver, accustomed to his boss's reserved habits, didn't question it. Arthur began to walk aimlessly, something he never did. His steps took him far from the business district, crossing through different urban landscapes of New York City. After nearly an hour, he found himself in an area he would never frequent under normal circumstances, somewhere in the grittier part of Midtown. Night had already fallen when he noticed a small figure sitting on the sidewalk near an old dive bar. A girl of about 7, with a small box of chewing gum in her hands, was approaching passers-by who, for the most part, ignored her. Arthur stopped a few feet away, observing. The girl wore worn-out clothes but was clean, her curly hair tied back in a makeshift ponytail. There was something in her eyes that captured him immediately, a mixture of sadness and determination that he knew well. "Mister, want to buy some gum?" The childish voice surprised him as he realized he had approached without noticing. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself. "Julia," the girl replied, looking at him with suspicion. "Each piece is $2. Arthur smiled for the first time in months. "How much have you sold today, Julia?" The girl did. A quick count in the box. $18, but I need to make 30 or Aunt Marlene will get mad." Arthur felt a tightness in his chest. "And if I buy all your gum, how much would that be?" The girl's eyes widened. "There are 50 pieces. That would be $100. He took out his wallet and handed her 2 $100 bills. "Keep the change." Julia looked at the money, startled. "That's a lot of money, mister." "You can call me Arthur. Where is your mother, Julia?" The girl's face hardened. "My mom left when I was a baby. My dad is She hesitated. "He passed away 2 years ago. Now I live with my Aunt Marlene." "And is she good to you?" Julia looked away, which was answer enough for Arthur. "Have you had dinner yet?" The girl shook her head. Arthur pointed to a simple diner across the street. "Can we talk for a bit while you eat something?" Sitting in the diner, Arthur watched Julia devour a sandwich and French fries, eagerly drinking an orange juice. Arthur, who had barely been able to taste food for weeks, surprisingly ordered a coffee and a croissant, which he consumed slowly. "So your aunt makes you sell gum every day?" Julia nodded. "Every day except when it rains a lot. Then she makes me ask for money at the traffic lights." A silence settled between them. Arthur couldn't explain what he was feeling. The illness, the terminal diagnosis, everything seemed distant at that moment. Something about this child connected him to life again. as if an invisible thread linked them. "Julia, I'm going to make you an offer that will sound very strange." He couldn't believe what he was about to say himself. "Would you like to spend a week at my house? I have a big house with a garden, a swimming pool. You would have your own room, toys, good food, like you were my daughter for a week." The suspicion in the girl's eyes was evident. "Why?" Arthur didn't know how to answer. "Maybe because we're both alone. I lost my son a few years ago. He would be about your age now. And after the week? We'll see. You can go back to your aunt if you want, or we can think of something different. Aunt Marlene won't let me." "How much would your aunt expect you to bring home today?" "At least $50. And what if you brought home 500? Julia's eyes widened again. "She would let me." Arthur took out his phone and called Julian. In 20 minutes, the driver arrived with the executive car. Julia hesitated before getting in. "Trust me," Arthur said. "I promise nothing bad will happen." On the way to the Upper East Side, Arthur called Paul, his lawyer and only true friend. "Paul, I need an urgent favor." "No, I can't explain over the phone. Come to my house early tomorrow." "Yes, it's important." When they arrived at the mansion, Constance, the housekeeper who had worked for him for over 20 years, looked astonished at the girl. "Mr. Arthur." "Constance, this is Julia. She'll be staying with us for a while. Please prepare the guest room next to mine, and see what we have in the kitchen for a proper dinner." The housekeeper, who had never seen her employer bring home guests, let alone a child, nodded silently and went up the stairs. Julia looked around in wonder at the entrance hall with its marble floor, the paintings on the walls, the imposing staircase. "It's like a castle," she murmured. Arthur smiled. "Come on, I'll show you the house." As they walked through the rooms of the mansion, something inside Arthur began to awaken. The feeling of emptiness that had consumed him for years seemed to diminish in the presence of this child. For the first time since the tragedy that took his family, he felt a purpose. That night, after a warm bath, probably the first in a long time for the girl, and dressed in one of Arthur's T-shirts that served as a nightgown, Julia was taken to the room prepared by Constance. "Is this whole room for me?" she asked in disbelief. "All yours," Arthur confirmed. "Sleep well, Julia." As he closed the door, Arthur realized that his constant pain, a daily companion for months, had subsided. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Or maybe, in that unlikely encounter, lay the beginning of something he didn't dare name yet. That night, Arthur slept without the help of sleeping pills for the first time in years, and he dreamed of Helen and Luke, not of the terrible scene of the accident, but of the happy moments they had shared. In his dream, they were smiling at him. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The morning arrived with an unusual brightness for the Montgomery mansion. Arthur awoke feeling strangely refreshed. He looked at the clock, 7:30 in the morning. He hadn't slept this late in years. He got up, put on his robe, and walked down the hall to the room where Julia was sleeping. He carefully opened the door a crack. The girl was sound asleep, hugging one of the pillows as if it were a teddy bear. Her face, relaxed in sleep, seemed even more childlike. Arthur felt a tightness in his chest. How many children like Julia were there on the streets of New York, deprived of the basics, of the safety of a home? He went downstairs and found Constance already busy in the kitchen. "Good morning, Mr. Arthur. Breakfast is almost ready." "Good morning, Constance. Prepare something special for Julia, too. I don't know what she likes, so make a little of everything." The housekeeper raised her eyebrows but nodded. "Mr. Paul called. He said he'll be here in an hour." "Excellent." As he drank his coffee, Arthur noticed that the taste seemed more intense, as did the aroma. It was as if his senses were awakening from a long slumber. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hesitant footsteps. Julia appeared at the kitchen door, still wearing the T-shirt that served as a nightgown, her hair disheveled. She looked insecure, as if she didn't know if she was allowed to enter. "Good morning, Julia. Did you sleep well?" She nodded shyly. "Come, sit here. Constance has prepared a special breakfast for you." The girl sat at the table and looked in awe at the amount of food. Fresh cut fruit, various breads, cakes, juices, chocolate milk. Can I really eat all of this? Of course you can. Eat as much as you want. Constance, who initially observed the scene with reservation, couldn't help but smile at the girl's joy in the face of the breakfast options. There was something in the purity of that reaction that could touch even the hardest heart. After breakfast, we can see about finding some clothes for you, Arthur said. I don't have anything for children here, but Constance can help with that, right? I can go. To the mall with her, sir. Excellent idea. Buy her everything she needs. The mansion's intercom buzzed, announcing the arrival of Paul Reynolds. Arthur asked for him to be let in. Paul was more than a lawyer to Arthur. He was possibly his only true friend, someone who had known him since their college days, and had remained by his side even during the dark years after the accident. He was the one who had handled all the legal procedures during that terrible period, protecting Arthur from the press and opportunists. Arthur, what's this urgency that couldn't— Oh, Paul stopped, when he saw Julia sitting at the table. I didn't know you had company. Paul, this is Julia. Julia, this is Mr. Paul, my lawyer and friend. The girl waved shyly, her mouth full of chocolate cake. Constance, why don't you take Julia to get ready while I talk with Mr. Paul? In the office, Arthur explained the situation to his friend, including his recent diagnosis. You brought a strange child into your home? Arthur, this is— Paul seemed to be searching for the right words. Unusual, to say the least. I know how it looks, but something happened when I found this girl. It's like— Arthur paused, looking for the right words. Like it was a sign. A sign? I'm at the end of the line, Paul. The doctors were clear. This disease will take me in a matter of months. I have no family, no one to fight for. And then I find this child alone in the world like me. What do you hope to achieve with this? I don't know. Maybe give some meaning to these last few months. Maybe do something good before I go. And she needs help, Paul. She lives with a relative who sends her to sell gum on the streets. What future will that girl have? Paul sighed. I understand your impulse, but legally this is complicated. You can't just keep a child in your house. There are procedures, laws. And this relative, however negligent, has legal custody. That's why you're here. I want you to investigate everything about Julia and her family, and I want to know what I can do to help her legally. Are you thinking of— I don't know yet. For now, I just want to give her a week of normalcy of childhood, then we'll see. I'll need more information about her. Last name, address, document. I'll talk to her, but carefully. I don't want her to feel interrogated. Meanwhile, in Julia's room, Constance was helping the girl get dressed in some old clothes she had saved. They belong to my niece, the housekeeper explained. They're a bit big, but they'll do until we buy new ones. Is all this for me? Julia asked, looking at the clothes spread out on the bed. Yes, dear. Mr. Arthur asked us to buy more today. He's very rich, isn't he? Constance smiled. Yes, he's very rich, but it wasn't always like this. He worked very hard to achieve what he has. Why does he live alone in this big house? The housekeeper's expression grew more serious. Mr. Arthur had a family, but there was a very serious accident a few years ago, and he lost his wife and son. He's lived alone ever since. He seems sad. He was very sad, yes, until yesterday. Constance adjusted Julia's blouse. You know, it's the first time in years I've seen him truly smile. When they returned to the office, they found Arthur and Paul talking in a calmer tone. Look, are you all dressed up? Arthur exclaimed upon seeing Julia. It's big, the girl said, showing the folded sleeves of her blouse. Don't worry, we'll buy clothes in your size soon. Julia, Mr. Paul needs to ask you a few questions to help you. Is that okay? She nodded, though she seemed apprehensive. Julia, what is your last name? Paul asked gently. Santos, Julia Santos. And where do you live? With my Aunt Marlene in a small house in Astoria, Queens, with 2 other families. Is your aunt your father's sister or your mother's? My mother's, but my mom left. When I was a baby, I never knew her. And your father, what happened to him? Julia lowered her eyes. He worked in construction. One day he had an accident and never came back. Paul and Arthur exchanged glances. Do you know where he worked? Arthur asked carefully. It was a big project, a building on Park Avenue. He always said he worked in the most important building on the avenue. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. His company had built 3 buildings on Park Avenue in the last 10 years. Do you know how long ago this happened? 2 years, I think. I was 5. Paul asked a few more gentle questions about Julia's life, her routine, school, which she rarely attended, and her relationship with Aunt Marlene. With each answer, Arthur's face grew darker. Julia, Constance is going to take you shopping now. You can buy clothes, shoes, toys, whatever you want. In the meantime, Mr. Paul and I will take care of some business. After the two left, Paul turned to his friend. Arthur, don't jump to conclusions. There are many construction projects, many companies in New York. What are the chances, Paul, you know, that around the time of Helen and Luke's accident, I left the management of the projects to others. I delegated everything. I didn't care about anything but profits. If there was a fatal accident on one of my sites, and if the compensation never reached this child, I'll investigate immediately. I have contacts at the Department of Labor who can check records of fatal construction accidents in recent years. If it was on one of your projects, we'll know soon. And what about the aunt? How can we ensure Julia is safe when she goes back? First, we need to understand the legal situation. If the aunt has formal custody, we'll need evidence of neglect or abuse to contest it. If it's just an informal arrangement, we have more options. Do whatever it takes, Paul. Money is not an issue. As the lawyer left to begin his investigation, Arthur felt a familiar pang of pain in his abdomen. He reached for the bottle of painkillers but hesitated before taking them. Something was different. The pain, though present, seemed less intense. Or maybe it was just his mind, now focused on something beyond his own situation. He walked to the room that had belonged to Luke. The door had been closed for 5 years. He took a deep breath and turned the knob. Everything was exactly as it had been that day. The toys arranged on the shelves, the children's books, the clothes in the closet. Constance kept the room clean and aired out, though Arthur never entered it. It was a shrine to an interrupted life. Now, looking at those objects, Arthur didn't feel the usual wave of despair. Instead, something different emerged. The realization that he might be able to give a new purpose to all of it. Not to replace Luke, nothing ever could, but to honor his memory in a way he hadn't considered before. When Constance returned with Julia hours later, the mansion no longer seemed like the same dark, silent place. There were shopping bags scattered in the entrance hall, and the girl's face was lit up by a smile that made her eyes sparkle. "Mr. Arthur, look what I got," Julia exclaimed, pulling a small teddy bear from a bag. "It's the first teddy bear I've ever had." Arthur felt something break inside him, like a final barrier of ice melting under the warmth of that childish joy. He knelt down to her level and smiled. "It's a very beautiful teddy bear. What are you going to name him?" Julia thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm going to call him Hope." "Hope? That's an unusual name for a bear. The teacher at school once said that hope is the last thing to die. I didn't really understand, but I thought it was beautiful." Arthur felt his eyes moisten, something that hadn't happened in years. "It's a perfect name, Julia." The third day of Julia's stay at the mansion began with a surprise. Arthur had prepared the room next to his, Luke's old room, for her. "This will be your room while you're here," he said, opening the door. "I hope you like it." Julia entered timidly, her eyes scanning the space that had been carefully adapted for her. The walls, once blue, now had a soft green hue. The bed had new sheets with a floral print, and on it were several new stuffed animals, in addition to Hope. A bookshelf held children's books, and in a corner there was a small table with drawing materials. "Is it for me?" she asked, incredulous. "All yours." Julia walked slowly around the room, touching each object with reverence, as if afraid it might all disappear at any moment. Arthur watched her from the door, feeling a mixture of emotions he couldn't name. "You know, Julia, this room belonged to my son, Luke. He would have been about your age now." The girl turned to him, her face revealing an understanding beyond her years. "What happened to him?" Arthur hesitated. "There was an accident, 5 years ago. Luke and my wife Helen were coming back from an outing when a truck lost control on the highway. Did they go to heaven? Julia asked with the simplicity of childhood. Yes, Arthur replied, surprised by the ease of the answer. They went to heaven. My dad is in heaven too, the girl said, approaching him and, in an unexpected gesture, taking his hand. Aunt Marlene said he fell from the scaffolding because he was clumsy, but I know that's not true. My dad was very careful. Arthur felt his heart ache. I'm sure he was, Julia. That morning, after breakfast, Arthur received an urgent call from Paul. Arthur, I found something. You need to come to my office immediately. Is it that serious? Can't you tell me over the phone? I think it's better if we talk in person, and bring the documents for that project on Park Avenue, the Centaurus building. Arthur felt a weight in his stomach. The Centaurus building had been his most ambitious project, a luxury office skyscraper completed about 2 years ago. I'll be there in an hour. Constance agreed to stay with Julia, who was busy exploring her new room and the toys she had received. Arthur left with a growing sense of unease. At Paul's law office in the financial district, Arthur was greeted with a grave expression. Sit down, Arthur. The lawyer opened a folder on the table. I found the accident report. It was exactly 2 years and 3 months ago, during the construction of the Centaurus building. A worker named Robert Santos fell from the 15th floor when a scaffold collapsed. He left a young daughter. Arthur closed his eyes, feeling the impact of the confirmation. Julia. Exactly. Julia Santos, daughter of Robert Santos, 5 years old at the time. How could this have happened? All our projects follow strict safety protocols. Paul sighed. Theoretically, yes. But you remember that time, Arthur. You were absent. You delegated everything to the board, to the managers, and the Centaurus was behind schedule, under pressure to be delivered on time. The subcontracted construction company, what was it again? Sierra Engineering. And here comes the most complicated part. Paul slid another document across the table. Sierra filed for bankruptcy 6 months after the accident. The compensation owed to Robert's family was never paid. Arthur felt as if he had been punched in the gut. And my company, weren't we subsidiarily liable? Technically, yes. But the case seems to have gotten lost in the bureaucratic shuffle after Sierra's bankruptcy. Some documents were misplaced. Paul looked meaningfully at Arthur. And you weren't exactly present to oversee these matters. The guilt hit Arthur like an avalanche. Not only had his negligence contributed to the accident, but his subsequent absence had left Julia destitute. How much should the family have been paid? According to the rates at the time, approximately $500,000. With adjustments and interest, today it would be around $650,000. And that never reached Julia. No. In fact, I found something even more disturbing. Paul opened another file. Julia's custody was temporarily granted to her aunt Marlene Santos shortly after the accident. It was meant to be a temporary measure until a permanent solution was found, as the mother had abandoned the family years before. But Marlene never formalized the final adoption, probably to avoid follow-up visits from Child Protective Services. So her custody is irregular? Precarious, I would say. There's a temporary document, but it's expired. Julia is in a legal limbo. Arthur was silent for a few moments, processing everything. What can we do? Several things. First, we can immediately pay the compensation owed, with all legal additions. Second, we can report the irregular custody situation to the family court. Third, Paul hesitated. If you're really interested, you could request temporary custody, citing the aunt's negligence and the connection to your company. I could do that. It's complicated, but not impossible. You have in your favor the fact that your company has indirect responsibility for the child's well-being, plus the bond you've already established with her. Against you, there's the fact that you're a single man with no experience with children and... Paul paused uncomfortably. And my health, Arthur completed. We don't need to mention that for now. If we can get temporary custody, we'll have time to sort out the rest. What exactly are you planning, Arthur? I'm not sure, but I know I can't allow Julia to return to a situation of abuse and neglect, not when I have the means to help her. Arthur, I know you feel guilty, but it's not just guilt, Paul, it's something more. Arthur looked out the window, observing the city below. When I received the diagnosis, I thought it was the end, that I would spend my last months in solitude waiting for the inevitable. Then I found Julia, and something changed. It's as if it gave me a purpose for the time I have left. Paul studied his friend carefully. You seem different, more alive. That's exactly how I feel. Alive for the first time in years. Well, if that's what you want, let's move forward. I've prepared some documents you need to sign. And we'll need to talk to Julia about this, explain the situation in a way that's appropriate for her age. When Arthur returned to the mansion, he found Julia and Constance in the kitchen baking cookies. The girl had flour on her face and a smile that lit up the whole room. Seeing him, she ran towards him. "Uncle Arthur, look what we made. They're chocolate chip cookies." It was the first time she had called him uncle, and the term stirred an emotion in Arthur he hadn't expected. "They look delicious, Julia. Can I try one?" As he tasted the cookies, Arthur observed the interaction between Julia and Constance. The housekeeper, normally reserved, seemed rejuvenated by the girl's presence. She laughed openly, a rare occurrence in recent years, and patiently explained each step of the recipe. "Julia, we need to talk about something important," Arthur said after their snack. "Do you remember telling me about your father's accident?" The girl nodded, her expression immediately changing. "I found out something about it. Your father was working on a building that my company was constructing." "The most important building on Park Avenue," Julia murmured. "Exactly, and because of that, I feel I have a special responsibility to you." "What do you mean?" Arthur thought carefully about how to explain it in a way a 7-year-old could understand. When an accident like that happens, the family has the right to receive some financial help, a compensation. But it seems you and your aunt never received that money. Aunt Marlene always says we're poor because the government steals everything. It wasn't quite like that, Julia, and I want to fix it. First, we'll make sure you receive what you're entitled to. And then, Arthur paused, I'd like to know if you'd be happy to stay here with me for longer, not just a week, but maybe permanently. The girl's eyes widened. Live here? Forever? If you want to. We'd have to talk to a judge, explain the situation, but I think it would be possible. Julia was silent for a long moment, which was unusual for her. And Aunt Marlene? She would receive her share of the financial compensation, but you would stay here with me and Constance. Could I go to school every day? Of course. A good school near here. And have friends and toys and a real family. Arthur felt a lump in his throat. Yes, Julia. A family. The girl jumped from her chair and hugged Arthur tightly. I want to. I really want to. That night, while Julia slept in her new room, Arthur had a consultation with Dr. Evans, who came to the mansion at his request. Honestly, Arthur, I don't understand, the doctor said after examining him. Your pain levels should be increasing, not decreasing, and your energy, you seem remarkably better than you did a week ago. That's exactly how I feel, Doctor. Better than I have in years, actually. The doctor frowned, consulting his notes. The scans don't lie. The cancer is there, in an advanced stage, but your physical response is unusual. Perhaps there's more to human health than just the physical, Arthur suggested. Well, certainly the emotional and psychological state has an influence. Science proves that. But in cases this advanced, the doctor shook his head. Anyway, let's repeat some tests next week. If this improvement continues, we can re-evaluate the treatment protocol. After the doctor left, Arthur sat on the balcony overlooking the garden, contemplating the stars. For the first time in a long time, he felt something close to peace. He didn't know how much time he had left, but now every moment seemed precious. In his pocket was the preliminary report Paul had prepared on Marlene Santos's situation. The findings were disturbing. Besides neglecting Julia, the woman had a record for petty scams and receiving fraudulent benefits. The money Julia earned selling gum likely went to alcohol and gambling. The plan was clear now. Arthur would use all the resources at his disposal to secure custody of Julia, and if time was denied him, he would ensure she never had to worry about her future again. He had already instructed Paul to begin the procedures for creating a foundation, the Robert Santos Foundation, dedicated to the safety of construction workers and supporting families affected by accidents. When he finally went inside, Arthur stopped at the door of Julia's room. He opened it silently and watched the girl sleeping, hugging her teddy bear, Hope. He smiled at the irony of the name. Indeed, Hope had re-emerged in his life through this small child found on the streets of New York. He closed the door carefully and went to his own room. For the first time in years, he didn't need his sleeping pills, and again he dreamed of Helen and Luke. But this time they weren't alone. Julia was with them, all of them smiling at him, like a promise that, in some inexplicable way, everything would be all right. A week had passed since Julia arrived at the Montgomery mansion. The deadline Arthur had initially proposed was ending, but no one mentioned it. The girl had integrated into the household routine as if she had always belonged there. That morning, as they were having breakfast, the phone rang. It was Paul with important news. "Arthur, I've managed to get a hearing with the family court judge for tomorrow. It's an exceptional opportunity. We can't waste it." "So quickly? I thought it would take weeks." "Let's just say I have good contacts and the case is truly exceptional. But there's one more thing." Paul paused. "We'll need to notify Julia's aunt. Legally, we can't just keep the girl without informing her guardian, even if the custody is precarious." Arthur felt a tightness in his chest. "I understand. When do we need to do this?" "I've already sent a process server to the address Julia gave us. The hearing is tomorrow at 10 a.m. "So soon? What if she comes to get Julia before then?" The notification clearly states that any attempt to remove the child before the hearing will result in legal complications. Also, I've prepared a preliminary compensation document. I believe the amount will be most persuasive." Arthur took a deep breath. "All right. I'll prepare Julia for the hearing. Will she need to be present?" "Yes, but don't worry. Judge Carmen Oliveira is known for her sensitivity with children. She'll speak with her in a separate room without pressure." After hanging up, Arthur returned to the breakfast table, where Julia was drawing excitedly in a new notebook. "Julia," he began carefully, "remember when we talked about you staying here for longer?" The girl looked up, suddenly attentive. "Yes, you said I could live here forever." "And I want that. But for that to happen, we need to talk to a judge, a very important person who decides what's best for children like you." "What if she doesn't let me stay here?" Fear was evident in Julia's voice. "We'll do our best to convince her. But you need to know that your Aunt Marlene has also been informed. She'll be at the hearing." Julia turned pale. "Is she going to take me away?" "No, sweetheart. I won't let that happen." Arthur was surprised by the firmness in his own voice. "But you'll need to be very honest with the judge. Tell her exactly what your life was like with your aunt." The girl nodded slowly. "I'm scared of her, Uncle Arthur. I know. And that's why I'll be there with you. I won't let her hurt you again." That afternoon, while Julia had a trial lesson with a private tutor Arthur had hired, he received an unexpected call from Dr. Evans. "Arthur, I have the results of the latest tests and, well, we need to talk. Can you come to the office today?" "Is it that urgent?" "Let's just say it's intriguing." 2 hours later, Arthur was sitting across from the doctor, who had a perplexed expression as he compared the new scans with the previous ones. "In 30 years of my career, I've never seen anything like this," the doctor said. "The primary tumor is showing signs of encapsulation. The metastases seem to have stalled." "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means the progression of the disease has slowed significantly. It's not a remission, mind you. The cancer is still there, but its behavior is completely atypical." "And how much time does that give me?" "Before we were talking about 6 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment. Now? Honestly, I don't know, it could be considerably longer. Also, your pain and inflammation markers are much better. How do you feel?" "Surprisingly well. The pain has decreased, I have more energy, I sleep better." Dr. Evans leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Has there been any significant change in your life in the last few weeks?" Arthur smiled. You could say that. On the way back home, Arthur reflected on the coincidence, or was it something more, between Julia's arrival and the stabilization of his illness. He remembered the girl's words about the teddy bear. Hope is the last thing to die. Perhaps there was some truth to that which went beyond medical understanding. When he arrived at the mansion, he found a scene that surprised him. A middle-aged woman in flashy clothes and with bright red-dyed hair was shouting at the gate while the security guard tried to contain her. "I want to see my niece now. I know she's in there. You can't steal her from me." Marlene Santos. Julia's description didn't do justice to the histrionic figure struggling at the mansion's gate. Arthur got out of the car and approached. "Mrs. Santos, I'm Arthur Montgomery." The woman turned to him, her bloodshot eyes sizing him up from head to toe. "So you're the one holding my niece captive. You know that's a crime, don't you?" "Julia is safe and well cared for. We have a hearing scheduled for tomorrow where we will discuss the situation properly." "I don't care about a hearing. I want my niece now. I have custody of her." "A temporary custody that expired over a year ago," Arthur retorted coldly. "Furthermore, we have evidence of neglect and possible abuse." Marlene's demeanor changed instantly. The face twisted in rage gave way to a calculating expression. "How much? I beg your pardon? Don't play dumb. How much are you willing to pay? Because that girl is my legal responsibility, like it or not. If you want to keep her so badly, you'll have to compensate me properly." Arthur felt a wave of nausea. This woman was literally putting a price on her niece. "As I said, we will discuss all of this at the hearing tomorrow. My lawyer will present a proposal for compensation related to Julia's father's accident, which was never paid. As for custody, that will be decided by the judge based on the child's best interests." "You don't know who you're dealing with," Marlene hissed. "I can make such a scandal that your reputation will be ruined. A rich old man keeping a little girl in his house. What do you think the newspapers would say about that?" Arthur moved closer, lowering his voice. "And what do you think they would say when they find out a 7-year-old child was forced to sell gum on the streets late at night while her aunt spent the money on alcohol and gambling? Or when they see the medical reports confirming chronic malnutrition and signs of physical violence?" Marlene backed away, the venom in her eyes almost palpable. "This isn't over," she warned before walking away. When Arthur entered the house, he found Julia huddled behind the door, her eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear?" She nodded. "Did Aunt Marlene come to get me?" Arthur knelt before her. "Yes, but don't worry. She's not going to take you, I promise." Julia hugged him tightly, as if afraid she would be torn away at any moment. "I'm scared of the hearing," she confessed, her voice muffled against Arthur's chest. "I know. But we're on the right," sighed Julia, "and we'll do everything by the book. The judge will understand." That night, after putting Julia to bed, Arthur was visited again by Paul, who brought documents for the next day's hearing. "I've managed to gather compelling evidence," the lawyer explained. "School reports showing Julia's minimal attendance, statements from neighbors, even a hospital record from 6 months ago when she was admitted with a broken arm. At the time, Marlene claimed the girl had fallen down the stairs, but the doctor noted suspicion of assault." "My God," Arthur murmured. "How did we let this happen? How did an entire system fail this child? It happens more than we'd like to admit. Children like Julia fall through the cracks of the system. Without parents present, with negligent guardians, they become virtually invisible." "Until now," Arthur said with determination. "Marlene was here today demanding to see Julia. When she realized she couldn't, she changed tactics. She tried to blackmail me." Paul didn't seem surprised. "Typical. Don't worry. I've prepared a financial settlement agreement that should satisfy her, without yielding on the custody issue. She doesn't deserve a cent. I agree morally, but legally it's simpler to resolve it this way. Besides, the compensation money for Robert's accident is a legitimate right even if it arrived late." After Paul left, Arthur went to Julia's room to check if she was asleep. The girl was sitting up in bed, hugging her teddy bear, Hope. "Can't sleep?" Arthur asked, sitting beside her. "I had a bad dream." "Do you want to tell me about it?" I dreamed that Aunt Marlene took me away, and I never saw you again." Arthur stroked the girl's hair. "It was just a nightmare. Tomorrow we'll be together at the hearing and we'll show the judge that your place is here. What if it doesn't work? It will, you know why?" Arthur pointed to the teddy bear. "Because hope is the last thing to die, remember." Julia smiled faintly. "Do you promise you won't leave me?" "I promise, Julia. I will never leave you." As he watched the girl finally fall asleep, Arthur reflected on the irony of that promise. Just 2 weeks ago, he had been prepared to abandon his own life, surrendering to the disease without a fight. Now, he found himself making plans for the future, a future that included Julia and a greater purpose. The next day, Arthur, Julia, and Paul arrived early at the courthouse. The girl wore a simple but pretty dress, chosen by Constance, and her hair was carefully combed. She looked like a different child compared to the one who sold gum on the streets just over a week ago. Marlene was already there, accompanied by a tired-looking lawyer. Upon seeing Julia, she made a move towards her, but Paul intervened. "Mrs. Santos, please keep your distance from the child until the judge's decision." The courtroom was smaller and less intimidating than Arthur had imagined. Judge Carmen Oliveira, a middle-aged woman with a serene expression, entered and formally greeted everyone. "Before we begin, I would like to speak with the minor in private," she announced. "Julia, can you come with me for a few minutes?" The girl looked at Arthur, who nodded encouragingly. "It will be okay. The judge just wants to talk with you for a bit." As Julia followed the judge into an adjacent room, Arthur's heart pounded. His entire future, and Julia's, depended on what would happen in the next few minutes. "She's going to tell everything," Marlene whispered with a malicious smile. "All the stories she made up. For you." Arthur ignored her, focusing on the door through which Julia had left. Paul placed a hand on his shoulder in a silent gesture of support. After what seemed like an eternity, the judge returned with Julia, who immediately ran to Arthur's side. The magistrate's expression was unreadable. "I have heard enough," she declared, taking her seat. "This is an unusual case, but not without precedent. I have before me evidence of neglect on the part of the current guardian, whose legal right is at best questionable given the expiration of the temporary custody. On the other hand, we have a candidate for guardianship who, although having no blood ties to the minor, presents adequate material and emotional conditions, as well as a connection to the case through the company involved in the accident that took the child's father." The judge paused, looking directly at Arthur. "Mr. Montgomery, are you aware of the responsibility you are undertaking? A child is not a charity object or a temporary project. It is a lifelong commitment." "I am fully aware, Your Honor, and I am prepared for that commitment." The judge nodded slowly. "Considering all circumstances and, most importantly, the well-being of, the minor, I have decided to grant temporary custody of Julia Santos to Mr. Arthur Montgomery for a period of 6 months, during which periodic visits by social workers will be conducted to assess the child's adaptation. After this period, if the reports are favorable, we will consider the possibility of permanent custody with a view to adoption." Julia squeezed Arthur's hand, a smile lighting up her face. Marlene, on the other hand, stood up furiously. "This is absurd. He bought everyone off. My niece was practically kidnapped and nobody does anything?" "Mrs. Santos," the judge intervened coldly, "I suggest you control your emotions. The financial settlement proposed by Mr. Montgomery is more than generous considering the circumstances. If you prefer to contest it, we can open a full investigation into your actions as a guardian over the past 2 years, including the destination of the funds the minor obtained by working on the streets." Marlene paled and fell silent. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear, and she nodded reluctantly. "We accept the financial settlement," the lawyer declared. "My client waives any future claims to the minor's custody." As they left the courthouse, Julia was skipping with joy. "Now, I can stay with you forever." "Well, for now it's 6 months," Paul corrected gently. "But if everything goes well, and I'm sure it will, then it will be permanent." In the car on the way home, Julia watched the city through the window, as if seeing it with new eyes. "Uncle Arthur," she said suddenly, "can I call your house my house now too?" Arthur smiled, feeling a strange lightness in his chest. Of course you can, Julia. It's our house now. And can we have a party to celebrate? A party? What kind of party would you like? A party, Julia thought for a moment. A party with cake, balloons, and where I can invite friends from school when I have them. That sounds like a great idea. We'll organize it. As the car moved through the streets of New York, Arthur reflected on how his life had completely changed in just 2 weeks, from hopelessness to purpose, from loneliness to companionship, from resignation to fighting, and all because of a chance encounter with a girl selling gum. Maybe it was true what they said, he thought. Maybe hope really was the last thing to die. And maybe, just maybe, it had the power to perform small miracles. 3 months had passed since the hearing. The New York autumn painted the trees in the garden of the Montgomery mansion with golden and orange hues. Julia, now enrolled at St. Monica's Academy, one of the most prestigious schools in New York, was adapting surprisingly well to her new life. That morning, Arthur watched from his office window as the girl waited for the school bus, wearing her navy blue uniform with a colorful backpack on her shoulders. Anyone who saw her now would never imagine that. Just a few months earlier, she had been selling gum on the streets. "Mr. Arthur, Dr. Evans is on line 2, Regina announced over the intercom. "Thank you, Regina." Arthur picked up, already guessing the nature of the conversation. He had undergone new tests the previous week. "So, Doctor, any news?" "To be honest, Arthur, I'm still perplexed. The results confirm what we had already observed. The tumor is practically stabilized. The metastases haven't progressed. Your blood markers are significantly better." "Does that mean I'm cured?" "I wouldn't go that far. The cancer is still present. But it's as if it has entered a kind of hibernation. In over 30 years of medicine, I've never seen anything like this without aggressive treatment, which you chose not to undergo." Arthur smiled to himself. "Maybe I've found a different kind of treatment, Doctor. Whatever it is, it's working. We'll continue with the monthly checkups, but honestly, if you asked me today for your life expectancy, I wouldn't know how to answer. It could be years, not months." After hanging up, Arthur remained thoughtful. The improvement in his health coincided exactly with Julia's arrival. Could it be that the simple act of opening his heart to that child had triggered a physical response in his body? Doctors talked about the power of the mind over the body, about how positive emotional states strengthen the immune system. Maybe there was something to it. The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Arthur, Mr. Paul has arrived. Ask him to come up." Paul entered the office with a thick folder under his arm and a satisfied smile on his face. "I have great news," he announced, sitting down. "The judge has approved the creation of the Robert Santos Foundation. All the paperwork is ready. We can begin operations immediately." "Excellent. And what about the Sierra engineering case?" "The investigation is moving forward. We've already identified at least 10 other families in a similar situation to Julia's, workers who suffered serious or fatal accidents and whose compensations were never paid due to the company's bankruptcy." Arthur nodded gravely. "I want all those families to be compensated, Paul, with interest and adjustments, and I want the foundation to establish a follow-up program to ensure that children like Julia have access to education and proper care. I've already included that in the foundation's charter. By the way, the social worker is supposed to visit today, isn't she? At 2 in the afternoon. But I'm not worried. The 2 previous visits were very positive. Julia is adapting well to school. She's made friends. Her nightmares have decreased. The psychologist says her emotional development is above expectations for a child who has been through so much trauma." Paul observed his friend carefully. "And you, Arthur? How are you adapting to fatherhood?" Arthur smiled. "It's challenging, I won't deny it. There are days when I have no idea what I'm doing, but—" He paused, searching for the right words. "It's as if I've found a purpose again. Something worth waking up for every morning." "And your health?" "Surprisingly stable. Dr. Evans is intrigued. He says he's never seen anything like it." Paul shook his head, amazed. "Sometimes life surprises us in ways we can't explain." After the lawyer left, Arthur dedicated the rest of the morning to the details of the Robert Santos Foundation. He wanted it to be more than just a symbolic gesture of reparation. It would be a real transformation in the lives of families affected by accidents in the construction industry, a sector that he knew well often neglected worker safety in favor of profit and deadlines. Furthermore, he had initiated a complete audit of all Montgomery construction projects, implementing safety protocols far more stringent than required by law. Some shareholders complained about the additional costs, but Arthur was adamant. He would never again allow profit to be prioritized over human lives. At noon, he decided to have lunch at home to be present when the social worker arrived. On the way, he stopped at a toy store and bought a gift for Julia, a children's telescope. The girl had shown a fascination with the stars after watching a documentary about astronomy at school. When he arrived at the mansion, he found Constance organizing everything for the social worker's visit. "The house is impeccable, Constance. Don't worry so much." "I want everything to be perfect, Mr. Arthur. This visit is important for the girl's future." Arthur smiled. The housekeeper, who had initially observed Julia's arrival with reservation, was now her most fervent advocate. She treated the girl like the granddaughter she never had, teaching her to cook, telling her stories, and caring for the garden plants. It was moving to see how that child had brought new life not only to him, but to everyone around. Him. At 2 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Martha Oliveira, the social worker assigned by the court, was a middle-aged woman with a serious but kind expression. This would be her third visit to assess Julia's adaptation to her new home. "Mr. Montgomery, how are you?" she greeted formally. "And where is Julia?" "She should be arriving from school any moment. Would you like some coffee while we wait?" As they talked in the living room, the front door opened and Julia ran in, her face lit up with a smile. "Uncle Arthur, I got a perfect score on my math test." Only then did she notice the social worker's presence. "Hi, Mrs. Martha." "Hello, Julia. It sounds like you have great news today." "Yes. The teacher said I'm the most improved student in the class, and I'm going to participate in the science fair next month." "That's wonderful, Julia. I'd like to talk with you a little about how it's been living here. Can we go to your room?" While Julia proudly showed her room to the social worker, Arthur waited in the living room, trying not to seem anxious. He knew these visits were crucial for the final adoption process. Although he was confident everything was going well, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. Half an hour later, Martha came down alone. Julia had stayed in her room, working on a school project. "Mr. Montgomery, may I be frank?" Arthur's heart sped up. "Of course. When I started on this case, I had many reservations. A single man with no experience with children, wanting to adopt a girl with no family ties, those are a lot of red flags in my profession. I understand. But I must admit, I have rarely seen such a successful adaptation. Julia is flourishing. Her academic, emotional, and social development is remarkable for a child who has been through so much trauma. She speaks of you with admiration and security. She feels protected, loved, and I can see the feeling is mutual." Arthur felt a lump in his throat. "She changed my life, Mrs. Oliveira. She gave my days a purpose." "That's exactly what I see, and that's why my report will be extremely positive. I believe the judge will grant the final adoption after the 6-month temporary custody period, if everything continues like this." After the social worker left, Arthur went up to Julia's room, where he found her bent over a colorful poster. "What are you doing?" he asked, sitting beside her. "It's my project for the science fair. We're studying the solar system, and I'm going to make a model with all the planets. The teacher said I can use lights to show how the sun illuminates each one." Arthur smiled, remembering the gift he had bought. "I have a surprise for you." He handed the package to the girl, who opened it with excitement. "A telescope," she exclaimed, her eyes shining. "Now I can see the real stars. We can set it up together this weekend. What do you think? Maybe in the garden where the view of the sky is better." "That will be amazing." Arthur watched Julia examine each piece of the telescope with curiosity and care. It was extraordinary how this girl, who had endured so many hardships, had kept her capacity for wonder intact, for finding joy in the simplest things. "Julia," he said after a few moments, "Mrs. Martha said everything is going very well. In a few months, the judge will probably let you stay here permanently. How do you feel about that? The girl looked up from the telescope, suddenly serious. I really want to stay here forever, Uncle Arthur. I'm afraid I'll have to go back to Aunt Marlene. That's not going to happen, I promise. But I want you to know that if you stay here permanently, there are some things we can decide together. For example, what you'd like to call me. What do you mean? Well, you call me Uncle Arthur, which is perfectly fine. But if I legally become your adoptive father, you could just call me Arthur, or... He hesitated, feeling an unexpected emotion. Or Dad, if you ever feel comfortable with that. Julia was silent for a long moment, seeming to process the information. I've never called anyone Dad besides my real dad, she said finally, her voice small. But I don't think he would be mad if I called you that too. He always said he wanted me to be happy. I'm sure he did, Julia. Your father was a good and brave man. By the way, I have something important to tell you. Arthur paused, choosing his words carefully. Remember I told you that the company where your father worked was mine? Julia nodded. Well, I've created a foundation with your father's name, the Robert Santos Foundation. It will help other children who lost their parents in work accidents, just like you. And when you grow up, if you want, you can be a part of it, help decide how to help those families. The girl's eyes widened. My dad would have his name on an important place. Not just a name, Julia, a legacy, something that will continue to help people for many years. Julia hugged Arthur tightly. Thank you, Dad. The word, spoken for the first time, hit Arthur like a wave of emotion. He felt his eyes well up as he hugged the girl back. That night after dinner, Arthur took Julia to the garden to set up the telescope. The sky was exceptionally clear, the stars shining brightly over New York, a rare sight in the usually light-polluted metropolis. Look, Dad, Julia exclaimed, pointing to the sky. A shooting star. Arthur looked up just in time to see the luminous trail cutting across the night sky. Quick, make a wish, Julia said urgently. The teacher said if we make a wish when we see a shooting star, it comes true. Arthur smiled. And what did you wish for? I can't tell, or it won't come true. But I'm sure it will happen. As he helped Julia adjust the telescope, Arthur reflected on how life could change so drastically and unexpectedly. Just 4 months ago, he was alone, sick, preparing for the end. Now he was under the starry sky, teaching astronomy to a child who called him Dad, making plans for the future, creating a foundation to help other families. And most surprisingly, his health continued to improve, defying all medical expectations. It was as if the universe had conspired to give him a second chance, through a chance encounter with a girl selling gum. Dad, Julia called, pulling him from his thoughts. I think I can see Jupiter. Arthur leaned in to look through the telescope. It really does look like Jupiter. See how bright it is. It's the biggest planet in the solar system, Julia recited, proud of her newly acquired knowledge. It has lots of moons and a big storm called the Great Red Spot. You're a fast learner, you know that. You're going to be a brilliant scientist one day. Julia smiled, her eyes reflecting the stars. Or an engineer like you. I could build safe buildings where nobody gets hurt. Arthur felt his heart expand with a mixture of pride and hope. You can be whatever you want, Julia. The important thing is that you're happy and do good for others. They continued to watch the stars for a while longer, Arthur patiently explaining the constellations they could identify. When they finally went inside, Julia was already yawning with sleep. Time for bed, little astronomer, Arthur said, helping her put away the telescope. After their nightly ritual, bath, brushing teeth, a bedtime story, Julia hugged her teddy bear Hope and looked seriously at Arthur. Dad, can I tell you a secret? Of course you can. Remember my wish for the shooting star? It was for you to get better from your sickness. Arthur was surprised. He had never spoken to Julia about his health condition, fearing it would scare her. How did you know I was sick? I heard you talking to the doctor on the phone once, and I saw the medicine in your bathroom. Aunt Marlene used to take similar medicine when she was very sick. Julia, but you're going to get better, right? My wish will come true. Hope is the last thing to die, remember? Arthur swallowed hard, fighting back emotion. I remember. And you know what? I think your wish is already coming true. I'm feeling better every day. Because of me? Yes, Julia. Because of you. When he finally left Julia's room, Arthur felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. Regardless of what the future held, how much more time he would have, one thing was certain. This child had saved his soul. And perhaps in some mysterious way that science couldn't explain, she was saving his body too. Looking out the hallway window, he contemplated the starry sky again. If he could make a wish on that shooting star, it would simply be to watch Julia grow up, to become the extraordinary woman he knew she would one day be. And, from the way things were going, maybe that wish wasn't as impossible as it had seemed a few months ago. A year had passed since the chance encounter on the streets of New York. The Montgomery mansion, once a dark and silent place, was now overflowing with life and color. In the garden, tables decorated with colorful balloons and festive banners awaited guests for a special celebration. "Dad, the flowers look beautiful," exclaimed Julia, now 8 years old, running through the garden in a sky-blue dress that highlighted her dark curls, now longer and healthier. "Mariana is going to love my party." Arthur smiled, observing his daughter's transformation. Yes, legally his daughter for exactly 3 months, since the judge had finally granted the permanent adoption. Julia had blossomed that year. Her face, once thin and tense, was now round and often lit by smiles. Her posture, once hunched as if expecting a blow, was now confident and relaxed. Her voice, once hesitant, was now firm and cheerful, especially when she excitedly explained some new knowledge acquired at school, where she excelled as one of the top students. "I'm sure everyone will love it," he replied, adjusting his tie. He had insisted on dressing formally for the occasion, despite the heat of the New York summer. After all, it wasn't just any party. It was the official celebration of 1 year together, now as a legally recognized father and daughter. "Mr. Arthur, the first guests are arriving," announced Constance, also dressed for the occasion, in a floral dress she had never worn before. "I'll greet them. Julia, want to come with me?" The girl nodded excitedly and ran to take his hand. Together, they headed to the entrance of the mansion. The first to arrive were Paul and his wife, Clarice, who were already a constant presence in Julia's life. "Uncle Paul," the girl hugged the lawyer enthusiastically. "Hello, Princess. Happy adoption anniversary." Paul handed her a large, colorful package. "This is from me and Aunt Clarice." Julia thanked him politely, but Arthur noticed her eyes shining with eagerness to open the gift. "You can open it now if you want," he permitted, knowing his daughter's curiosity was nearly overflowing. With a squeal of joy, Julia tore off the wrapping paper, revealing a box with an advanced children's microscope. "Wow! Now I can see the cells the teacher showed in the book. Thank you, Uncle Paul. Thank you, Aunt Clarice." Soon other guests began to arrive, Julia's schoolmates with their parents, some trusted employees from Arthur's company, Dr. Evans and his family, Julia's teacher, and even the social worker, Martha, who had become a family friend. Among the most significant guests was a group of families supported by the Robert Santos Foundation, including children who, like Julia, had lost their parents in work-related accidents. For Arthur, it was crucial that his daughter understood the greater purpose behind the foundation that bore her biological father's name. When all the guests had arrived and were settled in the garden, Arthur asked for everyone's attention, gently tapping a glass with a silver spoon. "I'd like to thank each of you for being here on this very special day for me and Julia." His voice was slightly choked with emotion. "Exactly 1 year ago, our lives crossed in a way I can only describe as miraculous. What began as a chance encounter on the streets of New York turned into the greatest blessing I have ever received." He looked at Julia, who was smiling, standing by his side. "Many of you know that when I found this extraordinary girl, I was at a very difficult point in my life. The doctors had given me only a few months due to a serious illness." A murmur went through the crowd. Although many knew of Arthur's illness, few were aware of the gravity of the initial diagnosis. "What no one could have predicted," he continued, "was what happened next. With each day I spent with Julia, something inexplicable happened inside me. The pain subsided. My energy returned. The will to live was renewed. He glanced at Dr. Evans, who nodded subtly. 3 months ago, I had a full set of scans again. The cancer that was once spreading aggressively through my body is now almost completely in remission. The doctors have no scientific explanation for it. New murmurs, now of astonishment and joy. Some would call it a coincidence, others a medical miracle. I prefer to call it by the name Julia gave her first teddy bear, Hope. Arthur took his daughter's hand. This child taught me that even in the darkest moments, hope is the last thing to die, and sometimes it doesn't die. It saves us. Arthur paused, visibly moved. Today, we don't just celebrate 1 year of living together. We celebrate a second chance, for Julia, who found a safe and loving home, for me, who found a purpose and, surprisingly, a cure that medicine cannot explain, and for many other families through the Robert Santos Foundation who now receive the support they deserve. Paul, who was nearby, raised his glass. To Julia and Arthur, may your story inspire many others. All the guests raised their glasses, some with tears in their eyes. Julia, a little embarrassed by all the attention, hid her face in her father's arm, but her smile was visible to everyone. The party continued joyfully, with music, games for the children, and lively conversations among the adults. At one point, Arthur stepped back a little to observe everything from a distance. Seeing his home, once a sanctuary of solitude now filled with laughter and life, was a surreal experience. Paul approached, offering him a non-alcoholic drink. "A penny for your thoughts," Arthur smiled. "I was just reflecting on how life can completely change in a year. If someone had told me, on that night I went walking aimlessly, that today I would be here, healthy, with a daughter, leading a foundation, I would have found it absurd." "Life has its surprises," Paul agreed. "And speaking of surprises, the papers for the foundation's expansion are ready. With the new endowment you've made, we can extend the program nationwide over the next 5 years." "Excellent. I want no child to go through what Julia went through, and no family to be left helpless after losing their provider in a work accident. You know what's most impressive about all this?" Paul gestured across the garden, at the children playing, the adults talking. "It's not just the good you're doing for Julia or the foundation's families. It's how you've completely changed your company's legacy. Montgomery Construction was known for efficiency and profitability. Now, it's a benchmark for social responsibility and workplace safety." Arthur nodded, acknowledging the truth in his friend's words. In recent months, he had implemented radical changes in all of the company's processes. The new safety protocols, far exceeding legal requirements, had become a competitive advantage. The support programs for workers' families, including scholarships for their children, medical and psychological assistance, had significantly reduced turnover. "And all because of a girl selling gum," Arthur murmured, more to himself than to Paul. Just then, Julia ran up, accompanied by one of the children from the foundation, a boy of about 10 named Gabriel. "Dad, can I show Gabriel my telescope? He's never seen a planet up close." "Of course you can, sweetheart, but be careful not to drop it, okay?" As the children walked away, Arthur felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost took his breath away. He watched Julia patiently explaining to Gabriel how to adjust the telescope, using the same gestures and expressions he had used when teaching her. Dr. Evans, passing by, stopped beside him. "Your latest scan results came in yesterday, Arthur. I wanted to wait until after the party to tell you, but I think you deserve to know now." Arthur felt a knot in his stomach. Despite the consistent improvements, there was always the fear of a relapse. "And?" "Almost complete remission. There are still a few abnormal cells, but in such a small quantity that many doctors would consider it a practical cure. If this continues in 6 months, we can declare total remission." Arthur closed his eyes for a moment, letting the news sink in. "Thank you, doctor, for everything." "Don't thank me. Scientifically, I can't explain what happened. The palliative treatments you agreed to undergo don't justify such a dramatic improvement." The doctor looked over at Julia, who was laughing as she helped Gabriel look through the telescope. but as a physician with decades of experience, I can say I've seen the power of the mind over the body many times. What you found, a purpose, love, hope, can be more powerful than any medicine I can prescribe. When the party finally ended and the last guest had departed, Arthur and Julia sat together on the porch, watching the night sky. The girl was tired but happy, leaning against her father's chest. "It was the best party in the world," she declared, with the absolute conviction only children possess. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. You deserve this, and so much more." "Dad?" "Yes, sweetheart? Remember when you told me you were sick, and I wished on the shooting star for you to get better?" "I remember. So my wish came true, didn't it? The doctor said you're almost cured." Arthur smiled, stroking his daughter's hair. "Yes, Julia, your wish came true." "I knew it," she murmured, already drifting off to sleep. "Hope is the last thing to die." As he carried Julia to her room, Arthur reflected on the incredible path they had traveled, from a lonely businessman and an abandoned girl to a family united by something stronger than blood ties, a love born from compassion and hope. He gently placed Julia in bed, tucked the teddy, bare hope beside her and kissed her forehead. "Good night, my miracle," he whispered. Leaving the room, he paused for a moment before the old photograph he kept on his nightstand. Him, Helen, and little Luke at the beach. For years, that image had been a source of piercing pain. Now, though the longing remained, there was also a sense of peace, as if Helen and Luke approved of the new path he had found. "Thank you," he murmured to the photograph, "for guiding me to her." He took one last look at the sleeping Julia and softly closed the hole. To her, tomorrow would be a new day, full of possibilities and plans for the future. A future that, against all medical expectations, now seemed to extend far beyond the few months he had been given. As he walked down the hall, Arthur reflected on the extraordinary power of human connection, how a chance encounter could change the course of two lives, how compassion could generate healing, how hope, when nurtured by love, could truly perform small daily miracles. Outside, the New York sky shone with stars rarely visible in the polluted metropolis. It was as if the universe itself was celebrating the journey of this man and this girl who, in their respective solitudes, had found each other and together discovered the true meaning of family. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Arthur and Julia has deeply touched your hearts. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other inspiring American stories. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this story about the transformative power of affection and hope moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Every day we bring you genuinely American stories that explore the depth of human emotions and celebrate our rich culture. We look forward to reading your reactions and impressions in the comments. After all, every story gains new life through the eyes of those who listen.